What would you do if your own family demanded you hand over your dream home to your sister as a wedding gift? And what if you discovered they'd already been spending your money before even asking? I'm Maya, and this is the story of how one slap at a charity gala taught me the difference between being loved and being useful. You know that moment when you realize your entire family sees you as nothing more than a safety net? Well, I'm about to tell you how I discovered mine had been planning to cut that net right out from under me. But first, let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Maya, and 10 years ago, I was that girl working two jobs just to make it through college. While my classmates were out partying, I was pulling double shifts at a diner and stocking shelves at a grocery store until 2 in the morning. The 2008 recession hit my family hard, but somehow I was the only one expected to figure it out on my own. I remember sitting in my tiny dorm room calculator in one hand, stack of bills in the other, doing math that never seemed to add up. But, you know what? I made it work. Every single semester, every single payment. No help, no handouts, just pure determination, and about 4 hours of sleep a night. Fast forward to today, and I'm standing in my loft in downtown Seattle, 2,000 square feet of exposed brick floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of hardwood floors that gleam like honey in the afternoon sun. When I first walked into this place 3 years ago, I knew it was mine. Not because I could afford it easily, but because I could see myself building a life here. The kitchen island where I'd finally have space to cook real meals. The corner by the window where I'd put my reading chair. That wall where all my books would live. This wasn't just an apartment to me. This was proof that all those years of sacrifice had meant something. I spent months making it perfect. Every piece of furniture chosen carefully. Every room designed to feel like the home I never really had growing up. You see, in my family, space was always conditional. Love was always conditional. But this loft, this was mine unconditionally, which brings me to last Saturday night. I was hosting a housewarming party, nothing fancy, just close friends and family, seeing my place for the first time. I'd been planning it for weeks, excited to finally share this achievement with the people I cared about. My parents arrived fashionably late, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way my mother's eyes immediately started calculating. You know that look, right? When someone walks into your space and you can practically see them taking inventory, making mental notes, judging every choice you've made. Well, this is certainly spacious, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone mothers use when they're about to deliver a criticism disguised as an observation. My father nodded along, hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the living room. Very impressive, Maya, though I have to wonder. He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a question mark. Isn't this a bit much for just one person? And there it was, not congratulations, not pride, just the immediate assumption that somehow my success was excessive, that I had taken more than I deserved. I mean, sweetie, my mother continued, her voice sticky with false concern. All this space, and you're here all alone. It seems almost wasteful. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one I'd learned to recognize as my body's early warning system. But I smiled anyway, because that's what I'd been trained to do since childhood. Smile, nod, don't make waves. I love the space, I said simply. It feels like home. My mother exchanged a look with my father. You know the kind of look I'm talking about. The one parents give each other when they think their child has said something naive or foolish. The look that says we need to have a conversation later. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what they couldn't see as they stood in my living room, drinking my wine and eating my catered food. This loft wasn't just my home. It was my fortress, and I was about to need every wall, every lock, every legal document I had to protect it. Because while they were busy calculating how much space one person really needs, I was starting to realize something much more disturbing. This wasn't a housewarming party for them. This was a scouting mission, and my little sister Lena, who'd been unusually quiet all evening, kept taking pictures of everything. The layout, the bedrooms, even the closets. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive, maybe getting decorating ideas for her own place. I had no idea she was actually measuring her future home. 2 weeks after my housewarming party, Lena called me with news that should have been nothing but joy. She was engaged. Ethan had proposed during a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, complete with a photographer hiding in the vineyard, and a ring that probably cost more than most people's cars. Maya, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. Ethan proposed. Can you believe it? We're getting married. And you know what? I was genuinely happy for her. Lena had been dating Ethan for 3 years, and despite some red flags, I'd noticed she seemed to love him. That's what sisters do, right? We support each other's happiness even when we have our doubts. Oh my God, Lena, congratulations. Tell me everything, I said, settling into my reading chair with a cup of coffee, ready to hear every romantic detail. She launched into the story with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. The sunset, the rose petals, the way he got down on one knee just as the golden hour hit. It sounded like something straight out of a Pinterest board titled Perfect Proposal Goals. But then she got to the part that made my stomach drop just a little. The only thing is, she said, her voice shifting to that careful tone people use when they're about to ask for something big. We're hoping to have the wedding pretty soon, like maybe in 6 months. And Maya, I was wondering if you could help us with some of the planning. You're so good at organizing things, and I just feel overwhelmed with all the details. Of course, I said yes. This is my baby sister we're talking about. The same girl I used to braid her hair for school pictures, who came to me crying when boys broke her heart in high school. If she needed help planning her dream wedding, I was going to give it to her. Whatever you need, Lena, I'm here for you. I told her already, mentally clearing my schedule to help with venue visits and dress shopping. Really? You're the best, Maya. I knew I could count on you. There's just so much to figure out. You know, the venue, the catering, finding a place for us to live after the wedding. Ethan's lease is up soon, and my little studio apartment is barely big enough for me, let alone both of us. That's when I should have paid closer attention. That's when I should have heard the subtle fishing expedition happening in her words. But I was still in big sister mode, focused on being supportive and helpful. Don't worry about it, I said. We'll figure everything out, one step at a time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding planning, dress shopping, cake tasting, flower arrangements. Lena seemed to have very specific ideas about what she wanted, which I thought was great. A girl should know what she wants for her wedding day. But my best friend Zoe, who'd been watching this whole process from the sidelines, pulled me aside after one particularly intense planning session. Maya, can we talk for a minute? She said, her voice carrying that serious tone that meant she was about to say something I probably didn't want to hear. We were sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by wedding magazines and vendor lists. Zoe pushed aside a stack of catering menus and looked me straight in the eye. I need you to listen to me, okay? And I need you to really hear what I'm saying. I set down my coffee cup. Okay, what's going on? You need to mark your boundaries with this wedding stuff, like clearly and definitively, because I'm watching what's happening here and I'm getting a really bad feeling about where this is all heading. What do you mean I'm just helping my sister plan her wedding? Zoe shook her head. No, Maya, you're not just helping. You're becoming the solution to every problem they have. And some of those problems aren't really your problems to solve. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through some notes she'd been keeping. Let me ask you something. In the last 2 weeks, how many times has Lena or your parents mentioned how perfect your loft would be for a young couple starting out? I felt that familiar tightness in my chest again. I don't know, maybe a few times, but they're just making conversation. Maya. Zoe's voice was gentle but firm. Last week, at the cake tasting, your mother spent 20 minutes talking about how hard it is for young couples to find affordable housing in the city. She specifically mentioned how lucky Ethan and Lena would be if they could find something move-in ready that didn't require a big down payment. I wanted to argue with her, but the pieces were starting to click together in a way that made my stomach hurt. And then, Zoe continued, your father spent the entire drive to the venue talking about how family should help family get established. How the older generation has a responsibility to give the younger generation a better start than they had. The thing about Zoe is that she's a paralegal. She's trained to notice patterns, to see the buildup of evidence before anyone else does. And right now, she was building a case that I really didn't want to hear. You think they're setting me up for something, I said quietly. I think they're laying groundwork. And I think you need to be very, very careful about what comes next. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying conversations from the past few weeks, looking for signs I might have missed. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Zoe was right. Like the way Ethan had started asking detailed questions about my mortgage payments under the guise of getting advice for when we buy our own place. Or how my mother kept mentioning how generous it would be if someone could help the young couple get on their feet. But the moment that really sealed it for me happened the next evening. I was supposed to meet Lena for dinner, but I arrived at the restaurant early and decided to wait at the bar. That's when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Ethan was sitting 2 tables away with my father, and they clearly didn't see me. Their voices were low, but the restaurant was quiet enough that I could hear every word. The thing is, my father was saying, Maya's always been very independent, sometimes too independent for her own good. But she loves Lena, and if we approach this the right way, I think she'll see that helping you two would be the right thing to do. I just want to make sure we're not overstepping, Ethan replied. I mean, it's a beautiful place, and Maya's worked hard for it. My father chuckled. Maya's worked hard, yes, but she's also been very fortunate. Sometimes fortune comes with responsibility, and sometimes that responsibility is helping family when they need it most. Ethan nodded slowly. So, you think she'd be open to the idea? I think Maya would do anything for Lena's happiness. The key is presenting it as a temporary arrangement just until you two get on your feet. A year, maybe 2 at most. That's when I realized I wasn't just overhearing a conversation. I was listening to 2 men plan my future without me. And the worst part, they genuinely seemed to believe they were doing something reasonable. I slipped out of the restaurant before Lena arrived and drove home in a daze. That night, I called Zoe and told her everything I'd heard. I hate being right about stuff like this, she said after I finished. But Maya, you know what this means, right? They're not just hoping you'll offer, they're expecting it, and they've probably already started telling people it's going to happen. As I sat in my living room that night, looking around at the space I'd worked so hard to create, I realized something terrifying. In my family's mind, this was never really my home. It was just a resource that would eventually be redistributed according to their sense of fairness. And the most heartbreaking part, my little sister, the one I'd spent my whole life protecting and supporting, was apparently okay with that plan. After that conversation, I overheard I decided to pay closer attention to what was happening around me. And let me tell you, once you start looking for patterns, they become impossible to ignore. It started with the visits. Lena had always been welcome at my place, obviously, but suddenly she was stopping by all the time. Not just for sisterly catch-ups, but with very specific purposes. She'd bring fabric samples to see how they looked in natural light. She'd measure windows for inspiration for her own place someday. She'd rearrange furniture to see how it might work better. At first, I thought it was sweet. My little sister taking an interest in interior design, getting excited about creating a beautiful home with her fiancé. But then, I noticed she was taking pictures of everything. Not just aesthetic shots for Instagram, but practical photos. The kind you take when you're documenting dimensions and layouts. One afternoon, she spent 2 hours going through my linen closet, claiming she wanted to organize it better as a thank you for all my help with the wedding. but I caught her measuring the shelves and making notes about storage capacity. Lena, I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, what exactly are you doing? She looked up from her measuring tape with that bright smile that had been getting her out of trouble since she was 5 years old. Just seeing how you maximize space in here, this closet is so much more efficient than mine. But here's the thing about being someone's big sister for 28 years. You learn to read between the lines, and what I was reading made my blood run cold. Meanwhile, Zoe had been doing some digging of her own. She worked for a law firm that handled a lot of real estate transactions, so she had access to databases that regular people don't. And what she found about Ethan's financial situation painted a very different picture than the one my family had been given. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with concern. Maya, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning? Sure, but you sound worried. What's going on? Just meet me at that place on Pine Street. And Maya, bring all the paperwork you have about your loft. Property, deed, mortgage documents, everything. The next morning, Zoe spread out a folder of documents across our table like she was preparing for trial. Her expression was grim. Okay, I'm just going to be direct here because dancing around this isn't going to help anyone, she said. Ethan is broke, not struggling, not temporarily tight on money, broke. She pulled out a printout. He defaulted on a car loan last year. He's got 3 credit cards maxed out to their limits. His current apartment, he's 2 months behind on rent and his landlord has already started eviction proceedings. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. But Lena said he got a promotion at work. She said they were saving for their own place. Zoe shook her head. Maya, he works part-time at a marketing startup that's barely staying afloat. His promotion was getting a fancy title with no pay increase. And those savings Lena mentioned, they don't exist. She pulled out another document. Here's the real kicker. That engagement ring he bought, he financed it through one of those predatory jewelry loans. 24% interest, and he's already missed 2 payments. The pieces were falling into place in the worst possible way. So, when my parents talk about helping them get started, they're not talking about giving them a boost. They're talking about giving them a complete financial rescue. And your loft isn't just the perfect solution, Maya. It's the only solution. That weekend, my family was gathering for what my mother called a casual dinner to discuss wedding details. But casual dinners in my family are never actually casual. They're carefully orchestrated meetings where decisions get made and expectations get set. I arrived at my parents' house to find Ethan already there, looking uncomfortable in the way people do when they're about to participate in something they know is morally questionable. During dinner, the conversation seemed normal enough. Wedding venue updates, catering decisions, guest list discussions. But I was listening differently now, hearing the subtext in everything. My father cleared his throat in that way he does when he's about to make an announcement. So, we've been thinking about Lena and Ethan's housing situation after the wedding. Here it comes, I thought. The rental market is just impossible for young couples these days, my mother chimed in. Even with dual incomes, finding something decent that they can afford is nearly impossible. Lena nodded along, but I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. We've been looking, but everything in our price range is either tiny or in terrible neighborhoods. My father leaned forward, which is why we think it might make sense for family to step in and help. And temporarily, of course. The word temporarily hung in the air like smoke. I knew exactly what was coming next. Maya, my mother said, her voice, taking on that sweet, reasonable tone she uses when she wants something. You have all that beautiful space and you're there all by yourself. What would you think about letting Lena and Ethan stay with you for a while, just until they get on their feet financially? And there it was. Not a request, not a suggestion, but a fait accompli dressed up as a question. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My parents, who had raised me to believe that family comes first. My sister, who I'd spent my entire life protecting and supporting. And Ethan, who couldn't even look at me because he knew this was wrong. Stay with me, I repeated slowly, in my loft. Well, my father said, we were thinking maybe you could temporarily hand it over to them. You know, officially, just for a year or two while they save up for their own down payment. My mother nodded enthusiastically. It would be such a generous wedding gift, sweetie, and you're so independent you could find a nice little apartment somewhere. Maybe something closer to your office. A nice little apartment, after I'd spent 3 years turning my loft into everything I'd ever dreamed of having. Think about it, Lena said softly. It would mean so much to us, Maya, and it's not like we'd be taking it away forever, just borrowing it while we get started. I sat there in silence, feeling like I was watching my family reveal their true selves in real time. These people who had never offered to help me with anything, who had watched me struggle through college and the early years of my career without lifting a finger, were now asking me to hand over my home like it was a family heirloom that needed to be passed down. But the most devastating part wasn't their audacity. It was the assumption underlying everything they were saying, the assumption that my life, my space, my achievements were somehow less important than Lena's happiness. That my years of sacrifice and hard work had all been leading up to this moment where I would prove my love for my family by giving it all away. That night, I sat in my loft and really looked at it. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every photo on the walls, every book on the shelves. This wasn't just where I lived. This was who I was. This was proof that I had built something beautiful and meaningful with my own hands. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along, but had taken me 32 years to understand. My family didn't see me as a person with my own dreams and needs and boundaries. They saw me as a resource. A reliable, generous resource that would always be there when they needed something. But resources don't have feelings. Resources don't get to say no. Well, I had news for them. This resource was about to malfunction. The night of the charity gala was supposed to be my moment. My company was hosting its annual fundraiser for youth entrepreneurship programs, and as the development director, I'd spent months organizing every detail. This was the event that would showcase everything I'd accomplished professionally, surrounded by colleagues, donors, and community leaders who actually valued my work. I chose my outfit carefully that morning. A midnight blue dress that made me feel powerful, paired with the pearl earrings I'd bought myself after my first big promotion. As I got ready, I kept telling myself this would be different. Tonight, I'd be seen as Maya the professional, Maya the achiever, not Maya the family resource. The gala was being held at the Four Seasons, and when I arrived, the ballroom looked absolutely perfect. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids on every table, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. I'd worked with the event planner for weeks to get every detail right, and seeing it all come together felt like a small victory. My colleagues were already there, mingling with guests and donors. Sarah, my assistant, rushed over with a huge smile. Maya, this is incredible. Everyone's talking about how amazing the venue looks and how smoothly everything is running. For the first hour, I felt like I was floating. My boss introduced me to the mayor as the mastermind behind tonight's success. A prominent local businessman asked for my card because he was impressed with my organizational skills. The executive director of the youth program we were supporting gave a speech specifically thanking me for my vision and dedication. This was what recognition felt like. This was what it meant to be valued for your contributions instead of your usefulness. But then my family arrived. I spotted them across the room. My parents dressed in their formal best, Lena stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They were talking to Ethan, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. My mother caught my eye and waved that bright public smile she reserves for social events. They made their way over to me, and for a moment, I hoped maybe tonight would be different. Maybe in this setting, surrounded by people who respected me, they'd see me differently too. Maya, darling, this is absolutely beautiful, my mother said, air kissing my cheek. You've really outdone yourself. My father nodded approvingly as he surveyed the room. Very impressive turnout. You must have worked very hard to pull all this together. For a brief moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe they were finally seeing what I was capable of. But then my mother leaned closer, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she uses when she wants to discuss private family matters in public. We really need to talk about what we discussed the other night, she said, her smile never wavering. Lena and Ethan are getting anxious about their living situation, and we thought tonight might be a good time to finalize the arrangements. And just like that, the spell was broken. Even here, even at my professional triumph, I wasn't Maya, the accomplished development director. I was Maya, the problem solver. Maya, the family bank account. Mom, this really isn't the time or place, I said, quietly, trying to maintain my composure while guests and colleagues mingled around us. Of course, dear, but we just need a quick answer. We've been telling people about your generous offer, and everyone thinks it's such a wonderful thing you're doing for your sister. My blood went cold. What do you mean you've been telling people? Lena stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. Maya, we've kind of already started making plans based on the arrangement. Ethan gave notice at his apartment, and we've been looking at furniture for the loft. I stared at her in disbelief. You've been making plans based on an arrangement that doesn't exist. My father's expression hardened. Maya, we've discussed this as a family. It's the right thing to do, and frankly, we're disappointed that you're being so resistant to helping your sister. Around us, the gala continued. Guests laughed and chatted, champagne glasses clinked, and the string quartet played on. But I felt like I was standing in the eye of a hurricane, watching my family's true nature reveal itself in the middle of my professional sanctuary. I need to speak with you privately, my mother said, her voice taking on that steely edge that meant the polite facade was about to drop. She guided me toward a quiet corner near the silent auction tables, away from the main crowd. My father and Lena followed, creating a little family huddle that probably looked friendly to outside observers, but felt like an intervention to me. Maya, my mother began, her voice low but intense. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this behavior needs to stop. Your sister needs your help, and as her older sister, it's your responsibility to provide it. My responsibility? I could barely keep my voice steady. Mom, that's my home. I worked for years to afford it. I sacrificed everything to build that life. And now, it's time to think about someone other than yourself, my father said sharply. Family comes first, Maya, always. What about when I needed help during college? What about when I was working 2 jobs and barely scraping by? Where was this family-first mentality then? My mother's face flushed with anger. That was different. You were learning to be independent, building character. But now Lena needs help, so suddenly independence doesn't matter. Lena is starting a family, my mother hissed. She needs stability and support. You're just one person living alone in more space than you could possibly need. The dismissal in her voice was like a physical blow. Just one person. As if my life, my achievements, my dreams were somehow less valid because I wasn't married. The answer is no, I said, quietly but firmly. I'm not giving up my home. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the gala continued its elegant dance, but in our little corner, something fundamental had shifted. My mother's face went through a series of expressions: rage, disbelief, and finally cold calculation. You're being selfish, Maya. Incredibly, unforgivably selfish. I'm being reasonable. I'm protecting what I've worked for. What you've worked for. My mother's voice was rising now, drawing glances from nearby guests. Everything you have because of this family, because of the opportunities we gave you, the support we provided. What support? When did you ever support me? And that's when it happened. My mother's hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap echoed across our little corner like a gunshot, and suddenly every conversation around us stopped. My cheek burned, but what hurt more was the look of satisfaction in my mother's eyes. as if she'd finally put me back in my place. I could feel people staring. My colleagues, my boss, the donors I'd spent months cultivating relationships with. This was supposed to be my night, my moment to shine professionally, and my family had just turned it into a public humiliation. But here's the thing about reaching your breaking point. Sometimes it doesn't come with tears or shouting or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it comes with a clarity so sharp it cuts through years of conditioning and self-doubt. I looked at my mother, then at my father, then at Lena, who was staring at the floor like she wished she could disappear. These people had just shown me exactly who they were and exactly what they thought of me in front of everyone who mattered to my professional life. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and very calmly opened my contacts. I scrolled to a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use, but had saved just in case. "Who are you calling?" my father demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed dial and waited for the voice on the other end. "Hi, this is Maya Chen. Yes, I know it's late, but I need to schedule an emergency appointment first thing Monday morning. It's about updating my will and some other legal protections." My mother's face went pale. "Maya, what are you doing?" I hung up the phone and looked at each of them one more time. "I'm protecting myself from people who think love comes with conditions and gifts come with strings attached." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a steady, confident rhythm. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't turn around. As I reached the ballroom exit, Sarah appeared at my side. "Maya, are you okay? What just happened back there?" I paused at the doorway and looked back at the gala one last time. My family was still standing in their corner, looking shell-shocked and lost. The other guests had returned to their conversations, but I could see the sideways glances, the whispered speculations. "What happened," I said quietly, "is that I finally learned the difference between being loved and being useful." I walked out into the cool Seattle night, leaving behind not just the gala, but the last vestiges of the person I used to be. The person who believed that if she just gave enough, sacrificed enough, made herself useful enough, she would finally earn the unconditional love she'd been chasing her whole life. That person was gone, and in her place stood someone who was about to show my family what real consequences looked like. Monday morning, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Williams, one of Seattle's most respected estate planning attorneys. Zoe had recommended her, saying she specialized in helping people protect their assets from family members who felt entitled to them. Apparently, this was more common than I'd realized. Patricia was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made you feel like your problems were about to be solved. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "So, let me make sure I understand," she said when I finished. "Your family has been pressuring you to essentially gift your primary residence to your sister and her fiancé with the expectation that this would be temporary but no legal protections to ensure you'd get it back." "That's exactly right." She shook her head. "Maya, I see this kind of situation more often than you'd think. Family members who view successful relatives as personal ATMs, who genuinely believe that your achievements exist to solve their problems." She pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across her desk. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're updating your will immediately. Right now, if something happens to you, your assets would default to your next of kin, which means your parents. We're changing that." The relief I felt was enormous. I hadn't even realized how vulnerable I'd been. Second, we're setting up a revocable living trust. This protects your assets while you're alive and ensures they go exactly where you want them to go if something happens to you. Third, we're documenting everything. Every conversation, every pressure tactic, every attempt they've made to claim ownership of your property. Over the next 2 hours, Patricia walked me through the legal fortress we were building around my life. Power of attorney designations, healthcare directives, property protections. It was like putting on armor I didn't know I needed. But the legal protection was only part of the healing I needed to do. That Wednesday, I had my first appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and boundary issues. Dr. Chen's office was warm and calming with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that made it easy to sink into difficult conversations. She had this way of asking questions that helped me see patterns I'd been blind to my entire life. Tell me about the earliest time you remember feeling responsible for solving your family's problems, she said during our second session. I thought back to when I was maybe 8 years old, my parents fighting about money, while Lena cried in the next room. How I'd started saving my allowance to buy groceries when things got tight. How I'd learned to be the responsible one, the one who fixed things because someone had to keep our family together. It sounds like you learned very early that your value came from your usefulness, Dr. Chen observed. That love was something you had to earn through service and sacrifice. But isn't that what family is supposed to do? Help each other. Healthy families help each other, yes. But there's a difference between mutual support and exploitation. In healthy families, help flows both ways. In your family, it seems like help only flows in one direction. That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so many years convinced that I was being selfish for wanting boundaries, that I'd never stopped to ask why those boundaries were necessary in the first place. Meanwhile, back at home, I was taking practical steps to protect myself. The first thing I did was change all the locks on my loft. I'd given Lena a spare key months ago, and I had no doubt she'd already made copies for herself, and possibly my parents. The locksmith was a chatty guy named Jim, who'd been in the business for 20 years. As he worked, he told me stories about other clients who'd had to change locks because of family members. "You'd be surprised how often this happens," he said, installing a new deadbolt. "People think because you're related they've got some kind of automatic right to your space, but blood doesn't entitle anyone to your property." Next, I went through every financial account I had and removed my family as authorized users or emergency contacts. My parents had been on my credit card accounts since college originally to help me build credit. But now, I realized they could see every purchase I made, every financial decision I'd been making. The bank representative who helped me was a young woman named Jessica, who seemed genuinely concerned about my situation. "Are you in any immediate danger?" she asked as we went through the account changes. "Not physical danger, no, but I'm definitely being financially manipulated." She nodded knowingly. "We see this a lot, especially with successful adult children and their families. People feel entitled to your money just because you're related to them." As we worked through the paperwork, Jessica mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I should tell you there have been several attempts to access your account information over the past few months. Someone called pretending to be you, trying to get balance information." "What kind of information were they trying to get?" "Account balances, recent transactions, that sort of thing. We didn't give out any information because they couldn't answer the security questions, but someone has definitely been fishing for details about your finances." I felt sick. My own family had been essentially spying on my financial life, probably trying to figure out exactly how much I was worth, and what they could reasonably demand from me. But Zoe's investigation uncovered something even worse. She called me on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with anger. "Maya, you need to sit down for this. I've been digging deeper into Ethan's financial situation, and it's worse than we thought." "How much worse?" "Remember that car loan he defaulted on? It turns out he'd been making payments for a while, but using cash advances from credit cards. And those credit cards, he's been paying the minimums by taking advances from other cards." I felt dizzy. "That's like financial quicksand." "It gets worse. That startup he works for, they haven't been paying their employees regularly for the past 3 months. He's been telling Lena he's getting paychecks, but he's actually been borrowing money to cover his share of expenses." "Borrowing from who?" "Your parents." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "Maya, your parents have been giving Ethan money for months. They've been telling him it's an advance on the help they're planning to get from you. They've essentially been spending your money before they even had it." I sat down hard on my couch, trying to process what this meant. My family hadn't just been planning to take my loft. They'd been using the promise of my loft as collateral for loans they were already making. How much money are we talking about? Based on what I can find, at least $15,000. Maybe more. $15,000. Money my parents didn't have given to a man who couldn't pay it back, all based on the assumption that I would eventually hand over my home to cover their bad financial decisions. But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. Over the next few days, I started noticing things around my building that made me realize just how far this had gone. The doorman mentioned that people had been asking about me claiming to be family members, looking to surprise me. The building manager said someone had inquired about the process for adding names to lease agreements. Even my neighbor across the hall mentioned seeing strangers taking pictures of our floor layout. They weren't just planning to ask for my loft, they'd been researching how to take it. By the following week, the consequences of my new boundaries were becoming apparent. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from my family, which I wasn't answering. My mother left increasingly frantic voicemails. Maya, we need to talk. There seems to be some misunderstanding about the arrangements we discussed. Maya, your father is very upset about what happened at the gala. You embarrassed us in front of all those important people. Maya, Lena is crying every day. She doesn't understand why you're being so cruel to her. But I also started hearing things through mutual friends. My cousin Rachel called to tell me that my parents had been reaching out to extended family members, trying to borrow money for a family emergency. They wouldn't tell me what the emergency was, Rachel said, but they seemed pretty desperate. Is everything okay? It wasn't okay. What was happening was that for the first time in years, my family was facing financial pressure without the safety net of Maya the problem solver. And they were discovering that their actual resources were a lot more limited than they'd realized. Ethan's eviction had gone through, and he'd moved in with my parents temporarily. But their house was small, and suddenly having an extra adult with significant financial problems was straining their retirement budget. Lena had been forced to scale back her wedding plans dramatically. The venue she'd wanted was no longer affordable, and the dress she'd ordered had to be returned because they couldn't make the payments. My parents had apparently been so confident that I would come through with the loft solution that they'd made financial commitments they couldn't keep. The loan to Ethan was just the beginning. They'd also co-signed for some of Lena's wedding expenses, assuming they'd be able to pay everything off once I handed over my property. But here's the thing about financial house of cards. Once you remove the foundation, everything else collapses pretty quickly. And I was about to find out just how desperate people can get when their carefully laid plans start falling apart. 3 weeks after I'd changed my locks and secured my finances, my father showed up at my office. He didn't call ahead, didn't make an appointment. He just appeared in the lobby telling the receptionist he was my father and needed to speak with me about a family emergency. When Sarah called to let me know he was there, I felt that familiar anxiety spike. But this time, something was different. I had legal protections in place, I had therapeutic tools to manage the situation, and most importantly, I had clarity about who I was and what I deserved. Send him up, I told Sarah, but stay nearby in case I need you. My father walked into my office looking older than I'd ever seen him. His usually perfect posture was slightly slumped, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. Maya, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. We need to talk. We do, I agreed. But before we start, I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded, and I have the legal counsel advising me on all family matters now. His face darkened. Legal counsel, Maya, we're your family. Why would you need lawyers to talk to your own family? Because my family has been making financial decisions based on property that doesn't belong to them. Because my family has been researching ways to add names to my lease without my permission. Because my family slapped me at a professional event when I didn't immediately comply with their demands. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out how to approach this conversation. The old Maya would have felt guilty for making him uncomfortable. The new Maya waited patiently for him to accept reality. Your mother shouldn't have done that, he said finally. The slapping. That was wrong. Yes, it was. But Maya, you have to understand the position you've put us in. We made commitments based on what we thought was a family agreement. Dad, there was never a family agreement. There was a family assumption. And that assumption was that my property, my home, my life's work was somehow available for redistribution whenever it suited the family's needs. He leaned forward, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Maya, we're in serious financial trouble. The money we loaned Ethan, the wedding expenses we co-signed for, we did all of that because we believed you were going to help. And now you're learning what happens when you make financial decisions based on other people's money without their permission. So that's it. You're just going to let your family struggle. This was the moment I'd been preparing for in therapy. The moment when my family would try to make their financial crisis my moral failure. Dad, I love you, but your financial crisis is not my emergency. Your poor planning is not my responsibility. And my success is not your insurance policy. He sat back in his chair, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father look truly defeated. I don't understand what happened to you, Maya. You used to care about family. I still care about family, but I've learned the difference between caring about people and allowing them to exploit me. I will always love you, but I will not be your solution to problems you created. The conversation ended with him leaving my office quietly without argument or further demands. And surprisingly, I felt sad rather than triumphant. I was grieving the father I'd wanted him to be, even as I protected myself from the father he actually was. But the hardest conversation was still coming. 2 days later, Lena texted me, asking if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. No parents, no Ethan. She wanted to talk. We met at a small cafe near Pike Place Market, neutral territory, where neither of us had the advantage of being on home turf. Lena looked exhausted, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Maya, I owe you an apology, she said before I'd even ordered my coffee. A real one, not the kind where I apologize for how you feel, but an actual apology for what I did. I waited curious to see if she really understood what she was apologizing for. I participated in something that was wrong. We were planning to take your home away from you, and I convinced myself it was okay because it would be temporary and because I needed it more than you did. She paused, stirring her latte absently. But the truth is I was jealous. I've been jealous of you my whole life. You've always been the smart one, the successful one, the one who figured everything out. And when I finally found someone who wanted to marry me, I wanted to have something that felt as secure and beautiful as what you'd built. This was not what I'd expected to hear. I'd prepared for manipulation, for more demands, for tears and guilt trips. I hadn't prepared for genuine insight. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she continued. I'm not asking for anything, actually. I just wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to realize how wrong we were. We talked for another hour, carefully, and honestly in a way we hadn't since we were children. Lena told me she'd broken up with Ethan after discovering the extent of his financial lies. She'd postponed the wedding indefinitely and moved back in with our parents to figure out her next steps. It's weird, she said as we prepared to leave. I was so focused on getting the life I thought I wanted that I never stopped to ask if I actually wanted it. We hugged goodbye, and while things weren't completely healed between us, they felt honest for the first time in years. The unexpected support came from my Aunt Claire, my mother's sister, who called me a few weeks later. Why, Maya, I heard about what happened with your parents and the Loft situation, she said. And I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family thinks you were wrong. Claire was the family rebel, the one who'd moved to Portland in the 70s, and never quite fit the mold of what my mother thought a proper woman should be. She'd always been kind to me, but we'd never been particularly close. I've been watching your mother manipulate people with guilt and obligation for 40 years, she said, and I've been waiting for someone to finally say no to her. We started talking regularly after that, and Claire became the family ally I'd never known I needed. She shared stories about my mother's patterns, helped me understand that this behavior wasn't new or unique to me, and validated my decision to protect myself. Your mother has always believed that other people's success was somehow unfair unless she benefited from it, Claire told me during one of our phone calls. She did the same thing to me when I started my business and to your cousin when he bought his house. Meanwhile, my mother's response to losing access to my resources was fascinating to watch from a distance. She started posting on social media about the benefits of minimalist living and how material possessions don't bring happiness. There were inspirational quotes about learning to live with less and photos of her decluttering the house. Anyone who didn't know the context would think she'd discovered some profound spiritual truth about simplicity. But I knew the truth. She was selling things to cover the debts they'd accumulated while planning to spend my money. The real test of my new boundaries came 6 months later when my father had a minor heart attack. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require bypass surgery and a lengthy recovery. My mother called me crying, saying they couldn't afford the medical bills and asking if I could help with the costs. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment when my family's real need would collide with my newly established boundaries. I drove to the hospital immediately, but not with my checkbook. I came with my presence, my emotional support, and my genuine love for my father. I sat with him during recovery, brought him books to read, and made sure he had company during the long, boring days of healing. But when my mother asked about financial help, I referred her to a hospital social worker who specialized in payment plans and financial assistance programs. "I'm here for Dad emotionally," I told her, "but the financial aspects of his care are something you'll need to handle through proper channels." She was angry, of course. But my father, weak as he was, actually nodded when I said it. "She's right, Linda. We can figure out the money part. Having Maya here is what matters." That's when I realized something profound. My father's love for me wasn't conditional on my usefulness. It had just gotten buried under years of financial stress and my mother's manipulative patterns. When the pressure was off, when I was just being his daughter instead of his solution, our relationship was actually better than it had ever been. Today, as I write this story, I'm sitting in my loft watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and pink. The space around me is exactly as I designed it, filled with furniture. I chose books I love and art that speaks to me. But I'm not alone. There's someone here with me now, someone who loves me for who I am rather than what I can provide. We met at a book club 6 months ago, and when I told him about my family situation, his response was simple: "Good for you for protecting yourself." He's never asked me for anything except my company and my honesty. He pays for his own dinner when we go out, splits costs fairly when we travel together, and would never dream of assuming he had any claim to my property or my resources. This is what healthy love looks like. This is what it feels like to be valued for your heart instead of your bank account. My family and I are in a much better place now, but it's a different place. We see each other for holidays, we talk regularly, and there's genuine affection between us. But they've learned that loving me doesn't give them ownership over my life. And I've learned that loving them doesn't require me to sacrifice my own well-being. Lena is thriving, by the way. She went back to school, got a degree in nursing, and is building a life based on her own efforts, rather than her ability to extract resources from others. We're closer now than we've been since childhood. My parents have downsized their lifestyle significantly, but they've also discovered they're more resilient than they thought. My mother complains less about money now that she's not constantly comparing her situation to mine. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things went down, if I wish I'd handled it differently, been more diplomatic, found a way to help my family without setting such firm boundaries. But here's what I've learned about revenge. The best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. The best revenge is refusing to let their dysfunction define your life. It's building something beautiful and protecting it fiercely. It's choosing your own well-being over their approval. The best revenge is living well on your own terms, without apology. And sometimes, The most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to be useful to people who don't value your humanity. I never had to give up my loft. I never had to compromise my boundaries. I never had to choose between loving my family and respecting myself. I just had to learn that both things were possible, as long as I was brave enough to enforce them. The sunset is fading now, and the city lights are starting to twinkle below. My home is safe, my heart is peaceful, and my future is entirely my own. And that, I think, is the happiest ending I could have asked for. What do you think about Maya's choice to protect her boundaries? Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself and finding the courage to put yourself first, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.